have such sights to show you.
We're Poppin the Scary Horror Podcast here. I'm your host, Coale, and with me, as always, I have my good friend and co-host, Aaron. Aaron,
Hello,
hey, how's the
hey.
holiday season go for you, bud?
Pretty good. I can't complain.
All right, that's a good place to be at, man. Yeah. Okay.
Holidays!
Yes, I know we are just pretty much getting closer to Christmas since Thanksgiving has already wrapped up and everything, but it ain't going to stop us from visiting one last relative in the Universal Monster fam, and that, of course, is the Invisible Man.
The Invisible Man.
So, Aaron, please tell me and the audience about your prior experience, memories, anything to do with the Invisible Man, the mythos, everything like that.
Actually, I have a funny story about the Invisible Man. In high school, junior year of my high school year, one of my summer reading assignments was Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison.
No, not you too! Not you too! I was
you-
going to tell that story!
Did you do the same thing
I did. So, like, oh my gosh. Fortunately, I didn't have, like, experience with that or anything like that. I was actually going, like, I'm not kidding you. I pulled it up just to show that I was going to talk about it there.
That's so funny.
Because I had the same mistake as well, because whenever I was getting really into it, and then I'm like, oh, they have a book for the Invisible Man.
Yeah.
And it turns out, I'm going to let you carry the rest of the story, but this is definitely, I've been there, bud.
Yes. So Ralph Ellison's classic Invisible Man is about, the experience of being a black man in America. It is definitely literature, and it's definitely something that they make you read in high school. What I picked up that summer was The Invisible Man. It's this different novel about a guy that turns himself invisible. I didn't realize my mistake until I was probably a good third of the way through the book. And I had to put it down and then pick up The Invisible Man. So I don't know how closely this movie follows the H.G. Wells book. Is it H.G. Wells, I think?
Yes.
That wrote The Invisible Man. But yes, I remember at least the sequence, because it's like pretty close to the beginning where he turns himself invisible, and I was like, oh, this is gonna be awesome. This is gonna be one of my favorite books for this class. But no, I ended up really enjoying Ralph Ellison's version. It has nothing to do with the guy that turns himself invisible, though. And, that's my experience with The Invisible Man. That and, like the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen or whatever. I think he's one of the people in there. But...
Yes, that's one of the people for sure. Yeah. In that movie adaptation of Alan Moore's comic book story there. Boy, that's a scary movie itself, and not for reasons you think.
It's been a long time since I've seen this. I really don't remember.
I've only ever seen The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen once, and it's one of those things that, looking back at it now, I don't think I would like it at all, but at the time, it's like one of those things that whenever I was less of a critic, back whenever I was less jaded about films, that I was like, huh, okay. That was like my view then, but now it'd probably be a lot more harsh. I don't know. Maybe if they released the 4K edition, show those sweet early 2000 CGI graphics.
Oh yeah.
Sean Connery actually said that's like his most hated film of all time.
Really, that he's in? Or
Yeah, like well, to be fair, I can't remember if it was that or Highlander 2, but I know that's what it was. He said League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is the film that made him retire.
That's so funny.
Where he's just like, I'm done filming these shitty films. Doing that. Yeah, but it is funny that you had a similar experience with the book. Fortunately, I didn't have it for a class project. This was just me, like, being curious about, like, oh, these Universal monsters are based off of old novels, like Bram Stoker's Dracula, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley and everything. So whenever I looked it up, I was like, Invisible Man. Okay, here we go. That doesn't sound like the plot to The Invisible Man. It has nothing to do with Invisible Man.
Way different than the movie, yeah.
This just sounds like a significant cultural piece. But yeah, whenever it comes to the idea of the Invisible Man, I've always been hit or miss with it. I feel like there's been, I mean, I guess it's just with any monster interpretation, good interpretations, bad interpretations of it. Even though it is a simple concept, it's just somebody that's invisible and everything. But I was always like, okay, Invisible Man, cool. But I never really thought beyond that about why he's invisible or anything else. I just always kind of assumed it was sort of like a Jekyll and Hyde situation where it was just like, oh, dude just messed with science and turned invisible. How about that? That was just my base consensus. And it wasn't until years and years and years later till I finally watched it, because whenever I was on my Universal Monster high, Invisible Man is definitely one that kind of takes more of a backseat, especially when compared to Dracula and Frankenstein kind of being the two biggies of the Universal Monster fam. So I've actually seen this film once, and I will reserve my overall thoughts about it until we watch it for a review. But no, it does make me lose my marbles that we both made the same mistake whenever it came to looking up the book.
They're very identical titles, but very different stories.
Yes, well, let's just see how different those stories are whenever we watch The Invisible Man. So stay tuned.
You're crazy to know who I am, aren't you? All right, I'll show you. I'll show you who I am and what I am.
And we are back from watching The Invisible Man, or should I say, not being able to watch, because he's invisible.
That guy, that goofy guy.
Yeah. Aaron, initial thoughts and tidbits about The Invisible Man.
That was a sillier movie than I expected.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. That was one of the first things that slapped me across the face when I first watched it. I'm like, oh, okay. Especially because the director is James Whale, who directed Frankenstein.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Which is not a very silly movie.
No, it's not. But it is funny because if you talk about him, he kind of had the same mentality as Tobe Hooper did about his own Texas Chainsaw Massacre films, where he saw a lot of humor in it, which is why we haven't watched it yet. In The Bride of Frankenstein, the sequel to Frankenstein, it definitely has a lot more laughs and everything. Yeah, it is definitely funny because this came out 2 years after Frankenstein, and the silliness factor is definitely like an 11 in this film.
Oh, yeah. Every police officer is just like the most goofy Bobby you could imagine. Just like, oi, what's going on there? What's all this then? An invisible man? Never heard such a thing. Yeah, and God, the barkeep at the beginning, the barkeep's wife or whatever.
Yes.
Who are you then? Just the most shrill, obnoxious woman.
Yeah, apparently James Whale really loved the actress who played her.
That's so funny.
Yeah, he thought that she was hysterical because she's in Bride of Frankenstein, so stay tuned for that.
They definitely included probably a few more clips of her than I would have. I think there's one part where it's just her like wailing over her husband being injured by the Invisible Man, just like for just way longer than should have been on camera. But
so yeah, goofy
very goofy
film.
movie. Yeah, an extremely goofy movie.
A movie, goofy movie. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, that was my thing as well, especially with like how relatively serious the previous Universal monster films have been. Like even though there were some goofy moments in The Wolfman, this like just said hold my beer. Yeah. Whenever it came to it, but we'll see if ultimately that ends up being a good thing for you or a not so good thing for you towards the end once we get into more of the finer details of the film. So general plot of The Invisible Man is that it focuses on the disappearance of this scientist named Jack Griffin, who is played by Claude Rains, which he was actually in the last film we watched. He was Larry Talbot's dad
Okay.
Yeah, which it's very funny because they're very two different characters.
Yes, yeah.
Here, whereas Claude Rains in the first one, in The Wolfman is very serious, grounded, matter of fact, almost to the point of pure ignorance. This one, he is determined to the point of insanity to make his point across about his goals and ambitions there. But he's gone, and so his friends, including his fiancée, are concerned about his well-being as they try to locate him. Meanwhile, we just get a slice of his current life of what he's doing as the Invisible Man. And from there, his friends are struggling as to how to help him out, and all the audience can do is wait and see how far Jack Griffin goes with his insanity and his insane experiment overall. Plot-wise, I think it's like very good, and I feel like James Whale really enjoys the has science gone too far aspect there. Because, I mean, that was the aspect of Frankenstein is like basically humans basically creating life, which is not a normal thing most people can do. Right. Just talk about the barriers of science. Now, granted, the profound message of Frankenstein, I wouldn't say is very much in this film.
Right.
It's definitely more in exchange for laughs than anything. But it does give Claude Rains a lot to work with. Like, he is grandiose as all get out. Like, the way he growls his voice and projects it whenever he talks about his insane ideas and everything. Definitely makes it a fun platform. But whenever it comes to the actually sobering realization of what he's done, he really doesn't get any of that. He's like full steam ahead on the cray-cray train.
Right. Because science demands it, you know.
Yeah. And I think for a film like this is probably just fine that he's just full steam ahead as opposed to trying to play it seriously, since they shoehorned so many jokes, not even just around him, just with the characters in general. There.
Yeah, it's definitely they gotta make him a little bit of a mad scientist to make him the villain. You know, these are Universal monster movies, you know, and he's got to be a monster somehow, and it's because his dedication to science and also a few murders along the way. So.
Yeah. Just a few murders.
Gotta make an omelet by cracking a few eggs, you know.
But I feel like plot point, it's perfectly straightforward. Just mad scientist going too far with his experiment. It's a good synopsis.
Yeah, I honestly felt like, and we'll dive a little bit more into when we get to criticism parts, but I honestly felt like this plot was maybe a little too simple just because of the other things that were in this movie were also pretty simple, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like the simple plot could work if it was like, and the Invisible Man is really cool, but also it sort of stopped at like, I'm invisible.
Yeah.
And then he didn't even go in any girls' locker rooms. He really scratched the surface of what you could do as an invisible man.
I think,
for me personally,
I would definitely agree with that, because like, while I will say I do enjoy this film quite a bit, I definitely feel like it is the least plot driven. It feels like more of an excuse to show off the effects, which, mind you, are freaking incredible, especially for 1933.
For that time, yeah, they look really good. I was like, how are they gonna pull this off? Because I was like, surely they're not green screened it in 1933, but they must have been doing something to achieve some of those invisible effects.
Supposedly, what they had to do is that frame by frame, they had to remove Claude Rains anytime he unraveled certain stuff. So it was just like literally just editing frame by frame.
Wow, that sounds tedious.
Yes, it was very tedious there, which is why I know we're in the character section as it is, but you know, it's a podcast, we jump around. But the effects, yeah, definitely incredible, just how much of it. It's not even just like oh, you get to see him turn invisible once. No, you get to see him invisible multiple times throughout the film.
And
so
I was really thinking they might cheap out on that aspect because it would be so difficult to achieve those sorts of effects in the 30s. But I feel like they didn't lean too heavily on the fully bandaged form of him or whatever. He's invisible a lot of the time, which is great because you're here to see a movie about an invisible man. So.
Yeah, I would definitely say so, because even, like, admittedly, even though I do like the Wolfman, there isn't a lot of the transformation that you do get to see. And it's funny that this film came out in 1933 and you're seeing them do a lot more of these crazy effects. Now, granted, that's why I feel like plot-wise, there's not as heavy, like, such a deep, heavy plot going on.
Right.
Because the gags they have going on, definitely kind of pause the story. It's like, ooh, look at the shenanigans going around there, which don't, like, you would think that would be a bad thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing for the story that they wrote. It's just the story ends up suffering. Well, the story, I guess, technically doesn't suffer because the story makes room for the gags. Yeah. It's just the story is stretched out so thin.
Right, yeah, I agree with that. I think the story leaves plenty of room for whatever they want to do writing-wise in the department for the plot. It's just, it ends up being so simple for me, and then they didn't add in a whole lot of, like, super compelling, engaging stuff to, like, maybe I'm just, like, Marvel movie pilled or something, like... Why isn't he, like, robbing the bank? Or, like, why? I wanted some cool overall, like, yes, I'm invisible. Check out my great power. And he does that. But his great power is, like, I'm gonna take your head off and throw it in the river. You know, like...
It's just like a teenager or something, or like a little kid.
For as much, like, mad scientist talk as he does, I just wanted to see some more action, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's totally fair. How did you feel how Claude Rains did in this film with his performance pieces, his monologues? How was he as a character?
Yeah, so so just to be clear, that's him completely bandaged up and everything too as the actor, and then also him just like when he's just projecting his voice in and they're doing special effects, right? That's all Claude Rains.
Yes.
I thought he did a pretty decent job of being, like, the mad scientist. I love his little cackles he's doing whenever he's doing
so good.
He's like a little goblin. And as somebody that just rewatched the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie, I love the Green Goblin's just cackles, you know.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned superheroes because Mark Hamill specifically referenced Claude Rains as an inspiration for the Joker voice he did.
Oh, really? That makes sense. I can see it.
Yeah, he said you can actually see him doing like an impression of Claude Rains where he says like, "I'll show you something that's crazy," you know. But he did it in the Mark Hamill Joker style voice, but he said Claude Rains was one of the biggest inspirations for his voice finding the Joker for the animated series. So that's funny that you mentioned that, the Willem Dafoe Green Goblin sort of thing. But I would definitely agree. I think like Claude Rains is very good at being menacing, like with his gravelly voice. And again, he's not a very tall person, as we saw in The Wolfman, especially compared to, again, what was he, like 5'8" versus 6'2", whatever, like that. He's not a very tall person, but yet he has a very commanding voice, which probably is the reason why he got casted as Invisible Man, because you're not going to see him at all there. And so whenever it came to it, he definitely had a sense of menacing as well as insanity purely laced in, especially whenever he goes invisible and he does that cackle and he's just making these dumb jokes throughout the entire film and singing nursery rhymes and everything. It's so goofy, but at the same point...
Yeah, I do like him silly as a villain, and I don't even mind all the other people being silly too, but I think it makes the most sense for him. Because for him, he really does think he's just above all these people and he could just toy with them, and so that's what he's doing, and I did like that aspect. But
I did also like that they mentioned that it's not just him, but also just the experiment he tried on himself containing a drug that actually makes people go insane.
Right.
And so they are like, yeah, he's probably going cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs right now.
Right, as a side effect. Like, yes, he's invisible, but also his brain is melting, yeah.
Mm-hmm. But, yeah, I think they did a really good job with the design of the Invisible Man. I mean, this is kind of like I believe one of the first representations of the Invisible Man on film. And for first representation, it's honestly pretty dadgum perfect. I love the bandages wrapped around, even at the beginning where you see tufts of hair, which turns out to be like a wig later and everything. I just love that first initial craze design there, as well as the suave design, like the smoking jacket and the little sachet wrapped around his waist,
striped pajamas.
Dude, it's so good. It's definitely good, and it doesn't feel like it's cheapening out either, because they do the effect multiple times, showing him take the bandages off, how he moves around invisible. Whereas a lot of films, like, to save money and time, they definitely would have just kept him in the bandages 24/7. Maybe if you're lucky, you get one last reveal, like, oh, he's escaping towards the end of the film, something like that. So definitely, I think Claude Rains was a perfect fit for this role, and definitely brings a lot of gravitas and grandiose to the role.
Right.
Which, unfortunately, compared to most of the characters you'll see in the film, he's definitely kind of the titular character, the one that they put all the eggs in a basket with, because it's like, yeah, Claude could carry this.
Yeah.
He could go all the way through. There's definitely cast of characters we can talk about there. Obviously, Dr. Jack Griffin, that we talked about, is good. We could talk about other characters, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be like
yeah, let's just fire them
shooting
off.
down.
They're not super memorable.
Yeah, and there is the love interest, Flora Cranley, played by Gloria Stewart. Which, fun fact, she's Old Rose in Titanic.
Oh.
Yeah, so this was a very much younger version of her, and she does perfectly fine in this film, but again, it's kind of given sort of the same role. I will admit, I feel like it's a little less shameful in this film, maybe just because in The Wolfman previously, the love interest was so quick to flip-flop and everything, it didn't have a ground to stand, whereas with her, she's constantly worried about him, and just has a moment of like, you guys aren't going to be able to convince him. Leave me in a room to talk with him, and I'll try to talk him down to it. So at least they give her character a little more to work with, but it is, again, an unfortunate circumstance that's like, okay, you care about this character, you don't want him to turn, but then you're not left with a lot of emotional waver.
Right. I mean, it's the 30s. This film doesn't exactly pass the Bechdel test. But yes, so her whole point is that she loves him, and is also the daughter of the main scientist dude that employs the Invisible Man.
Yes, Dr. Cranley.
Dr. Cranley.
Yes, who is Exposition Man.
Yeah, he's basically there to just be like, oh, no, we must do this in the morning. Oh, yes, he disappeared a fortnight ago, or whatever.
Yeah, he's just like, oh, this is the experiment he was messing around with. Only a rough draft, the drug.
This drug I remember reading, and he wouldn't have read this because it was in German. That's an important detail, I guess.
And it came out later, just recently.
Right, so he doesn't know that this drug is driving him insane, but I do, camera. So now you know, audience.
James Whale just making sure, and that's loophole is sealed.
Tie that little bow.
Yeah, doing that. Definitely just one of those things where the actor who plays Dr. Cranley, Henry Travers, just kind of given more exposition, reasoning, and everything. I feel like the only other character that you get to focus on a lot is his associate, Dr. Arthur Kemp, played by William Harrigan. And that was so good. And I feel like, again, Kemp is a good character, just basically practically being held hostage.
Yeah, no, I love Kemp. Like, I feel like he doesn't get a lot of agency as like an actor in the role, because he's just literally like, not literally held at gunpoint, but essentially held at gunpoint. Like, all right, you're my assistant to take over the world, or I'll kill you. And so he's just like constantly. I love some of the scenes where he's like being directed by the Invisible Man. Do this, do that, and like he's like, no, don't look at me. And he has to like pretend there's somebody there. I feel like in those moments, he was pretty fantastic. But in many of the other moments, he's just like, I'm another man that talks like this in the 30s movie, you know? Like,
that's true. I think, like, it's more of the idea of a character like this being stuck that's great, as opposed to the actual character himself. Yeah. But, you know, I feel like Dr. Kemp is good in the sense that he's just terrified the entire time. Like, he is mortified to the point where he's going against the advice of others, and he's like, you know, oh, to hell with you guys, I'm getting the hell out of here, sort of mentality.
Yeah, he's been held hostage by this invisible man who he already kind of, they set up some negative feelings about. He's trying to steal his girl, basically, in the beginning of the movie.
He's pretty dadgum straightforward as well.
Right. He does not miss a beat. He's like, all right, he's been missing for a month now. He doesn't like you. Let me tell you my feelings.
Yes, dude. Tries to swoop in. But yeah, definitely it makes it fun. Is because, like you mentioned, it's like, you know, the character Dr. Griffin and everything talking to him. He's like, now you listen here, and you'll do exactly what I tell you to do. Like, and he's just rocking in an invisible chair, holding a cigarette, invisible.
I love that they, like, there's so many ideas of how you'd want to portray the Invisible Man, and I'm glad they didn't leave a lot on the cutting room floor. Because, like, yeah, of course he's got to smoke a cigarette while he's invincible. Of course he's got to, you know, carry this book around. Of course he's got to just run with nothing but pants on. You know?
Yeah, I think James Whale, you could tell he just had a lot of fun making this film, and, you know, it's like good for him and everything, because it just seemed like he was a dude that just wanted to have fun in life, from what I've understood about his personal life. But yeah, I would definitely agree. It just sets up a fun dynamic. And while I do agree they don't go as far as, like, man, what can you do with the Invisible Man and everything? I do feel like they do at least exercise some stuff of, like, oh, like, what's a visual thing that would look really cool?
Yeah, they do.
And I feel like they focus more on the visual aspect than they do the actual, like, big galaxy brain moment.
Right, like the actual plot points of, like, yeah. Because overall, all of this kind of takes place more or less in random, you know, England town or whatever. You know, it's not like, man, he talks a great deal about what the power he has could do, but then we just don't get to see it on film. But.
Yeah, for sure. And pretty much the only other people aside from the entire dadgum police force in the film is the Halls who run the bar, Jenny and Herbert Hall, which Una O'Connor is the one that gave that lovely shrieking performance there.
Good on her. Got quite some pipes.
Yeah, she is definitely someone that, like, the shrieking, you're either going to love it or hate it. There is no in between, because it's very shrill and loud and constant.
Yeah.
And even then, she's either bossing or screaming. That's like her two modes there. And she's just like, well, why did you bring out the mustard?
Now I've got to bring the mustard to him, and he said he wanted to be left alone.
Yeah. She'll scream at, like, important stuff, like her husband bleeding to death down at the bottom of the stairs, but she'll also scream, like, whenever the Invisible Man slams the door, where he's like, I thought I told you to stay out of my room.
Yeah.
You know, and slams the door. She's like,
she just like drops the teapot and runs down the stairs with her arms.
Just like a Looney just like a Looney Tunes character.
It is very cartoony. Yeah.
So yeah, I think that works in this film because of how insane it is. Granted, not everybody is absolutely insane, but again, whenever we have the baffling police force, you know, because no joke, like, you may think Aaron is, like, just, like, doing a stereotype. No, they literally go, "Who wants all this?" Yeah,
they found, like, the most chinless mustache man to play the Bobby. He's just like, he's just actively sucking his chin in, like, all right, then what's going on here?
I believe that was E.E. Clive playing Constable Jaffers. I would have never guessed that. Thank you, IMDb. But it just legit was like, what's all this then?
Oh, right, some kids playing another joke on me here.
Oh, it's so good. But yeah, and then even going back to Jenny Hall, having Herbert Hall, again, he's just kind of like the yes dear sort of person, just going along with it there. And that's about it, because then you have the rest of the characters just kind of responding to the Invisible Man. But I will give an extra, like, oh man, I forgot he was in this film. Dwight Fry is one of the reporters at the end, which he played. Fritz is from Frankenstein. Renfield is Dracula. Okay. Yes, so he was there. He was the one that was asking the questions to the constable there as the reporter with the hat and glasses on. So that was like, oh, that's cool. He's acting completely normal in this role.
And not like a weird little goblin.
Yes, for sure. But that's just a fun little Easter egg thing I pointed out. Like, Leo meme pointing there. Yeah. But yeah. So talking about characters and everything, definitely, I do want to hit at home. The special effects in this film are crazy, because they go all out, not only with the Invisible Man, but just like stunts in general, and just the amount of mayhem and havoc that's caused, and the practical effects are shown. Some of it is like a little cheesy, but I mean, still for the time, it's pretty dadgum good, right? Like, because this film is 90 years old.
Yeah,
it's 90 years old, and so just being able to do stuff like that, I'm just like, man, that just still looks super good. It's just one of those things where you appreciate it. Whether it's like the Invisible Man holding items in the air, which is like simple, like, oh yeah, that's wire, stuff like that. Or like bicycles, or again, like we mentioned, he runs around in like trousers.
Yeah, just pants at one point. Yeah. There are definitely times where you can like see through his hat and his bandages and into the other side. Yeah, they did a bit where he's riding a bike, so there's just a bike standing straight up running down. You can see sort of the seams and the smoke and mirrors in some points, but for a lot of it is still pretty seamless, which is impressive.
Yeah, and I was honestly kind of surprised how much mayhem they allowed to happen in this film. I think out of all the Universal monster films, this might be the most chaos caused by one of the monsters.
Oh yeah, and that was like sort of his goal almost in some parts. It's like, I'm gonna get the word out that there's an Invisible Man and it's a powerful thing, so that eventually I can take over the world. Like, there's a point where one of the police officers is like, oh, well, this is all a hoax. And then he, like, messes with the police officer just to be like, it's not a hoax, I'm right here. Ha ha! Like, he wants to be known. So,
yeah, and that's, like, the fun thing that they went down the route of he's just absolutely insane versus, big mastermind making people believe that this is all an illusion or something, that he's actually not there. But it's that he wants to be known that he's there. He wants people to be, like, fearing for their lives there. And because his whole goal is to sell the experiment to
whatever nation has the highest bid, so he can be filthy rich, and then nations fight each other with invisible armies. And
yeah, so he has big ambition. Surprisingly, it's not just complete mindless mayhem. But there's some mindless mayhem along with the intentional mayhem.
Right. What we end up seeing in the movie is mostly mindless mayhem. Or I guess mayhem to create a buzz, but it doesn't actually mean anything. He kills a lot of innocent people, honestly, that aren't doing anything to him.
Oh my gosh. I will say not a lot of music. It's kind of like, the older Universal monster films where they don't have music blasting. It's not like the Wolfman where like music was constantly on blast there. It's definitely more quiet, but I feel like it works well for the Invisible Man because it allows you to hear like the creaks of floorboards there moving around. Definitely just kind of important for sound and everything. So, I definitely don't feel like it's a bad thing that they don't have it there. I know we're kind of getting towards the end of the line before we can really get into spoilers there, but is there any other aspects you did want to talk about with the Invisible Man before jumping into spoilers?
I don't think so. Yeah, it's a pretty straightforward movie, honestly. It's not too long either, is it? It's probably...
I think it's an hour and a half long. Yeah. So just keeps it right at that like 90-minute mark.
Yeah. Unfortunately, with the special effects are probably the biggest thing to talk about because I don't think, and we've talked so much about them. But I don't. Unfortunately, I don't think there's a lot else in this movie that really wowed me besides the special effects and the surprise I had at how goofy it is. But.
Yeah. Oh, and I was 19 minutes too long. It's an hour 11 minutes.
Okay, that's right. It seems pretty short. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty short overall there. But yeah, so I guess we'll just jump right into the ratings we have for The Invisible Man. So please, Aaron, take it away.
I'll keep it short and sweet, just like the movie, baby. This is like a 5 out of 10 for me. I give it a lot of props for, the special effects standing so much the test of time. I do like the actual Invisible Man himself. And I appreciate some of the goofy, gaffy parts of this. Unfortunately, I feel like there's not a lot of substance to the style. I felt like the plot overall was mostly driven by the intrigue of the Invisible Man and not that necessarily that interesting of a plot overall. And most of the characters besides the actual Invisible Man, who you don't even really get to see half the time, you just hear him talking, are not as interesting as the main character. So for that reason, it's like a flat 5 for me. But
yeah, that's fair. So the real question is, does this mean you enjoyed Invisible Man more than The Invisible Man?
Yeah, I guess as far as I never did finish the book, The Invisible Man, so I can't say anything about H.G. Wells' full book because I never finished it, even though I didn't enjoy the quarter of it I read. But
I was talking about Invisible Man.
Yeah. But comparing that to Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, I mean that's a masterpiece. I mean, that was like literally my favorite book in high school and for most of college, I think, until I expanded my reading palette a little bit. But I love that book. Yeah. I was like, this is wow. I mean, this is blowing little. I was probably like 16 when I read that. Blew my 16-year-old brain.
Well, you'll get them next time, James Whale.
Yeah, I don't. If there was I'm sure if they tried to do a film adaptation of Invisible Man in 1933, it would probably be really bad. So I would probably like this movie a lot more.
Thank you, James Whale, for not trying to adapt Invisible Man.
I don't think it was written yet in 33. Maybe it was, but it probably wouldn't have handled it with a lot of tact.
No, definitely not. Definitely save it for later for an adaptation. Okay, so with me, it's kind of funny because I went through some similar motions whenever I watched the film, that I was expecting something really grounded and everything. But then as soon as like the cheese came out and everything, it didn't detract me too much. It didn't like push me away, but it was definitely like, oh, well, that was silly, wasn't it?
Well, that was like kind of goofy moment.
But watching it the second time and knowing, okay, this film is going to be silly, it just made me appreciate the silly moments more since I was prepared for it and everything. So in that, like, I can't keep trying to throw this up here, but I know, and who knows, maybe talking about the plot, it could go down like Wolfman did from its 8 to 7.5. This one's an 8 for me as well. I just think it's fun. I will say the slower moments, like initially whenever I did watch it, I rated it a 7, and I thought about coming at it with a 7.5, which maybe that's where it actually should be, but I don't know. I had a good time, and I was watching, like, man, trying to really look at the effects, and even know, you ever watch those behind the scenes things, how they show how the effects are done, and you're still just like, yeah, I'm just amazed by it. Like your brain still can't comprehend how they did it. Yeah. It's kind of like to that level for me with a lot of stuff, because I love learning how people make movies and everything, especially with special effects, whether it's like one of the ones I rewatched recently is Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and even though I know exactly every step they did to make it, I still get lost in it every time I watched it. It kind of has that effect on me as well, because it's so freaking good, the effects, and Claude Rains is just a fun person. I honestly just had a lot more fun, and especially kind of picking up a lot of the very dark tones this film played in jest. So it just made it a very fun film, and it's actually my wife's favorite Universal monster film. She's like, I love this film. a ton. It's her favorite one, just because again she enjoyed the silliness and goofiness of it there. So for me, it's definitely one people should watch. Now, granted, if you're expecting like a deep, serious, dramatic, gothic interpretation, if you haven't caught on by now, this isn't it.
Right.
This is not it. But if you're looking for something just fun, with a little bit of darkness sprinkled in there, but mostly just lots of cheese and goofiness, you're going to have a great time, I think. Definitely a good one to play at parties, I think, for
Absolutely.
sure.
And also one that, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, go.
I know there's a horror movie podcast called Poppin the Scary. I'll say the scary score on this one's like a 0 out of 10.
Yeah.
It is not remotely scary at all. It's just, it's got some darker themes, and it's he's just kind of spooky monster guy in some sense. But even like the Wolfman's scarier than this. Like, there's nothing. There's no jump scares. There's no. There's nothing even relatively like super suspenseful. Like, ooh, it's just like, it's just the guy's invisible, man. And he be killing, but half the time he's killing, it's funny.
Yes, that is accurate. It is funny because it does kind of like, it is interesting. Yeah, it's really not a scary film. It's one of the least scary films we've watched on this podcast. But there is definitely some dark moments of like, oh my God.
Right, he just did that. Okay.
Like, especially for 33 and everything, you're like, okay.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. But that's James Whale for you. He just had fun with dark humor and everything. So that's our reviews overall. Aaron coming at a solid 5 and me coming at generous 8. But yeah, this is definitely your time to duck out if you don't want to get spoiled about the ending of the film and all that good stuff, because we're jumping right in, baby. So Aaron, take it away with that first spoiler.
Man, how about him beating the sheriff to death?
Oh my God.
That was because it started out. That's like a perfect example of like how funny some of the violence in this movie is portrayed, and then like you realize, oh, that had a consequence. Because like in the beginning of that, he's like, well, this is a hoax. I'm ready to declare that nobody should pay attention to the Invisible Man. And then he like splashes some ink on his face, and it's like, oh, haha, he's messing with them. And then he just beats him to death with a stool. Just kills the sheriff. And everybody was like, all right. Like, what a funny joke that was. So I can see how Mark Hamill was like, the Joker. I'm going to take inspiration from this. This guy's having a great time just killing people.
Oh my gosh. I love that scene too, because whenever that scene takes place, it basically is focusing on Dr. Griffin telling Kemp basically like, I need to go back to that hotel and get my books, and you're going to help me.
Right.
And, you think it's like a covert mission, because, like, he sneaks in sneakily through the door, and they think, like, it's the kids opening the door and everything. And so he has a successful stealth mission, like, 100% made it through. And so you think, like, okay, that's it. He's just going to leave, and that's it. But, like you mentioned, he starts screwing with the sheriff, who says, like, well, there's no Invisible Man here. Now, let me sign off on this report. And then, the ink bottle starts swirling around and it splashes in his face. And like you mentioned, and you're thinking like, oh, it's a gag. He's not going to say anything. But then he just starts tossing glasses and then everybody's freaking out. It's chaos. And then he's choking this man to death, then beating his face in with a stool. It's just so, and he's just like, you think there's no Invisible Man, do you? Like, it's just like, yeah, he's just, and he kills the dude. He straight up kills the dude because they show him like taking his body out with like a blanket draped over. Like, it's just very like, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Because like, again, if you were like Giga Brain, you would go the stealthy way, but no, he wants that level of infamy. He wants people to know it's him doing all this chaos and everything, because the exposition they have behind it is like, people believe that there's a gas and makes people hallucinate an invisible man running around, because it's like in this quaint little village and everything.
And that wouldn't be the first time that there was mass hysteria, especially in that era of filmmaking. But so, like, a lot of things, Salem witch trials were mass hysteria, where everybody believed there were witches in the village, So, I thought that was a neat little detail of how they justified it. They're like, yeah, there's a lot of reports of this, but there must be people going insane because there's no such thing as an invisible man. And then later on, the radio has to be like, turns out we've confirmed the reports. There's an invisible man, and also lock your windows and your doors.
Mm-hmm.
And I did think it was nice how they showed all the townspeople preparing for the invisible man, picking up their bats and locking their doors and everything. But...
Dude, everybody was just like straight up terrified. It was pretty dadgum great, and
everybody was really bad in catching him.
Yeah, well, and it's funny too because like him killing the police chief, that's like really the first thing he's done. That's just.
Was that the first murder?
That's the first murder that happens. Granted, he did knock over a baby carriage.
That's
just
true.
Up.
When he was terrorizing the town, he was like, yeah, in between like throwing somebody's hat in a river and like taking somebody's bike. Yeah, he just knocks over a baby carriage and you like see the baby, the bundle that you assume is the baby fall out. Like, Jesus, did he just kill a baby? I don't know.
Yeah, the levels of like violence and tricks he does is like going from 0 to like 8.
Yeah,
you know, there because like he even just
one of the biggest things he does is he derails a train.
Oh my gosh, that's even later.
They say later that he's like that. We're like, yeah, he killed 100 people on that train. Like, Jesus,
that was one of the moments like that. I'm just like, oh my gosh, because you even hear screaming and everything.
Right.
It's not just the train crashing; it's like crashing, screaming, fire.
The way it was cut was still so goofy. You could tell it's a model train, you know, and if it goes off the track, and the whole time I was thinking, like, why do they have a lever that just turns the train off the mountain? Like, here's the track that goes straight off the mountain, you know?
Oh, it's so good. And I think what happens before, that's him, like, taking the tray of money from the bank, right?
Yeah.
It's like a little petty thief, and he's just like...
Well, he takes the train, then he throws it for everybody to get. Yeah.
It's just crazy transitions like that it's like, okay, this is like just petty theft, you know, him just sprinkling money out and him just saying, here you go, here's a gift from the Invisible Man. Yeah. You know, doing that, and then he drops a tray, and then he's like derailing a tray, killing 100 people.
Robin Hood to terrorism. Like, real quick.
Yeah, but it also just makes it funny that he's not just one note. He's doing stupid little petty things, like especially whenever he screws around with the people, because like he first scares the people that are going up to the room. This is the first reveal, which, mind you, I think it's a great reveal whenever he first shows like him like being invisible and everything. The rap they did especially. But then it scares them, and they're like, no, we have to go back up there and deal with it.
Before he gets all of his clothes off, yeah.
Yeah, and then he's just like this shirt running around on the chair going,
flapping his arms around.
It's like literally just like a Benny Hill chase, like they're chasing around the chair, and then he like takes the shirt off, and then it's like, oh, he jumped out the window. He's like, you think I would jump out the window like a petty criminal? I'll choke you. I'll kill you. And he's like, yeah. And then he just like walks straight out again. And it's just, again, causing that mayhem as, you know, whether it's tossing a hat in a river, throwing bikes, beating people with brooms, or tossing babies.
Yeah, right.
Like, it's just crazy stuff like that. But the whole town, Frankenstein's mom was like, oh yeah, we're going to get that monster. Meanwhile, this is like, hold my beer. They even said like, oh, the plan's to get thousands, then tens of thousands in order to stop him from causing this mayhem.
It's just so crazy because they could have just been stopped if they just like went forward instead of backwards anytime he touched them, you know?
Yeah.
They were really bad. Like, this whole room full of police officers, he somehow manages to, like, squeeze between them to splash the ink on the guy and slap him around. And then he's just choking the guy. Like, if he's choking you, you know where he is. You know what I mean? Why is nobody getting him off you? Why is nobody, like, just as soon as he arrives and does anything, they just flee like cockroaches. They're like, ah!
Yeah, it's funny how quick, like... Even though the police force does adopt new techniques, and you're like, oh, that's clever, as soon as he appears, the plan goes out the window, apparently, because they have this whole great scene where Kemp's called, first he called Dr. Cranley, who was just like, you know, Jack's here in the house, you gotta save me. You gotta save me real quick, he's gonna kill me. And he's just like, no, if I go now, he'll get suspicious, you know? And
in the morning.
Yeah, and so then he's like, oh, fine. And so then he calls the police because he just can't wait. And whenever they get to the house and everything, I do have to say, I do love the back and forth there. Like, whenever Jack starts questioning Kemp, basically, like, why are you down here? Why did you have the door locked? He's like, I couldn't go to bed and everything, and I was scared. Would you be scared if you were in my position? He's like, I'm your friend, your partner. And then as soon as Dr. Cranley and Flora pull up, he's like, I see you called the police on me, did you? He's like, no, I swear I didn't. Look, it's Dr. Cranley. He's like, oh, Flora. And so then he's back. But then as he's talking to Flora, which I do like a ton, and I'll talk about that, they show, like, the police linking arms as they're shrinking around the house.
Yeah, you can't break through this impenetrable defense.
But then as soon as he's like, oh, he tossed me hat off.
Yeah.
Oh, he got me nose. Yeah. And then the other person's pulling like, oh, he's got me legs. And then he's swinging around in a circle.
Yeah.
The policemen are just scrambling.
He does a Solange Bowser to the guy.
He does!
He just grabs him by the pants and swings him around. Solange Bowser!
And then he steals the
He
pants.
steals his pants and runs off, yeah.
And chases a woman down the street wearing the pants. So you just see a pair of pants as he's, again, singing a little song.
If I lived in the universe where the policemen were just that level of incompetent, I mean... Man, if he tried that in America, they just would have started shooting everywhere. Where is he? I don't care, start shooting. Light up the house.
Shoot first. Then maybe ask questions later. Deny questions later. That's what it is.
Exactly.
And so they do that, and then they have techniques of like, okay, we're going to hold the net like this and move.
Yeah, right.
Because then he'll get caught. And then they have like paint guns.
Right.
Just
and loose dirt on the wall so they'll know if he tries to climb it, you know.
Yeah, they develop new techniques there. And then obviously towards the end of the film, that's whenever they have the final technique. That's a surefire way to get them. But before getting to the overall ending, because I feel like there is some things to unpack there, just so I don't forget, I will say I do appreciate that Flora does get a moment to talk with him because he just kind of... You get to see a different side of him because you could tell he still loves Flora, which is actually kind of nice to see a different side. Like, it's not completely one note there. Now, granted, it's not super deep, the level of talk, but you can at least see that he still, even in the madness mindset he's in, he still loves Flora a ton because he's just like, I was penniless whenever you found me, but soon I'll be rich and famous, and I'll be able to give you everything you want. You know, doing that, which I do feel like it's, for me, the way I interpret it is half true. He thinks that, but it's also he's doing it for his own ego there for sure, which I think is a great character moment. So I definitely appreciate James Whale having a breather moment there, because there definitely is some moments, especially while talking, where you're like, okay, it's a little, it's a little slow, a little quiet. Let's get back to
position heavy right now.
Claude Rains as the Invisible Man, which again, I do feel like there is plenty of him in. So that, because that definitely would have, the film would have suffered if it wasn't for Claude's shenanigans injected in, basically. But yeah, I do have to say, I love the adamance of Kemp whenever I do love the threat that Jack does to Kemp. Like, as soon as he sees the police out, and he's like, thank you for opening the window, and know this, by 10 p.m. tomorrow, you will be dead.
Right.
You can count on that. And so he's, like, bitching, like, straight 10 p.m., and that's a pretty dadgum strong threat, especially with how precise the time is and everything. And whenever they're talking about it, it's like, it's okay, we'll have you well guarded and everything. He's like, no, you'll be able to get through. I can tell you that. I need to get out of here and everything. And it's like, I don't know. I mean, I think you'll be fine. I think you're overreacting. He's like, no, I know him. He's going to get to me and everything. He's like, all right, fine. We'll escort you to police station, surrounded by police, covered in a net. Move to the police station, disguise yourself as a policeman, take you back to the house so you could drive in the car away and away. Which, again, he's like, I'm going to go to the mountains where nobody can find me. He's just so adamant about just leaving and getting the heck out of there, which I can believe, but also at the same point, he should know that he's going to find out.
Right.
And he will find you.
Right.
Because Jack seemed 112% confident that, which by the way, I just realized his name's Jack and the love interest Flora plays Rose.
Like Titanic.
Yes, anyways, I don't know how intentional that is, but I just had a sudden realization moment.
That's funny.
But I do love the reveal of, like, he does all that, and you even have a moment where, again, the Invisible Man, sees Kemp leave, he's like, think you're so clever, huh? And then you don't know what he does, because, again, they're trying to look out for him, but there's no sign. Unfortunately, the only thing that kicked Earth off was that white cat, which then is shown covered in spray paint, which I'm just like, I hope that was done somewhat ethically.
It's the 30s. They probably just spray painted a cat.
Yeah.
And threw the rest of the litter in a bag into the river.
Oh, Jesus. Oh, my gosh. Oh, my gosh, Aaron.
I'm just imagining the most likely scenario for 30s Hollywood.
I mean, I'm not going to say you're wrong, but jeez. But yeah, and I do love that reveal and everything. Whenever Kemp is like driving in the mountainside and everything, he's like, well, it's 10 o'clock and you're not here. He's like, oh, I wouldn't believe that. You know,
your whole plan was foiled by me following you slightly closely behind you.
I just love that. It's just like, just the easiest way of like, how'd you know? I was following.
I literally just walked behind you. You guys didn't notice. I'm invisible. So.
It's so funny yet so like clever at the same time. Like it's stupid clever.
And I love how he explains every part of it too. He was like, I walked behind you and watched you change to the police uniform and then hitched a ride on the buggy that dropped you off or whatever. And it's like, yeah, we get it. Well, you could just be like, well, I was following you, man.
Yeah, and I do like, he's like, now I've been freezing to death because of you. And so then he manages to drag him out of the car by the scarf and tie him up. And I do love Kemp being like, please, I'll do anything you want, Jack. Please, just untie me from these bonds. He's like, yes, you will do as I say. You're going to go right down that hill through the railing and crash into that boulder. And so I do love the fact that whenever he slams the door there, it's quiet, so you think it's just going to be a silent car crash, but as soon as it goes over the railing, they bring back that cackling. And boy, oh howdy, what a car wreck that is. It's just immediately, first impact explodes into flames, toss, rumble into a fiery wreckage pile at the bottom. It's a good car wreck.
I would have been pretty sad, because I'm sure they didn't get to do a lot of takes on this, so I would have been pretty satisfied if I was behind the camera like, yeah, that was a good car explosion.
Yeah, the like that in the train, I was like, that was actually pretty good. Looked pretty good, well shot, man. Everything's perfectly framed and everything. It just looks good. I mean, obviously you know how it's done, but it still looks really good and believable. But I do like towards the end of the film, like how he's inevitably caught. Where again, he's like, you know, in the mountainside and he decides to sleep in a little hay barn, and the farmer happens to see him or notice something's in the hay bale
with his honk shoe ass snore.
Yeah. I love the term honk ass.
One of those.
And I do, and they do bring it up early in the film about like the Invisible Man's like saying like they add mythos to the character of like, oh, what happens if he eats something? And he's like, well, the food is still seeable in my stomach, so I can't go whenever I have a meal.
And I do remember those details from the book, so I think it's really interesting they wove them into the movie, because he was like, if I'm in a city with too much smog, soot will make an outline on me. You know, if I'm in the rain, they can see me. If I'm in fog, then... So he has all these weaknesses, despite the fact that he thinks he's like this superior life form now. But...
And the snow ends up being like an idea the police chiefs have, where it's like, oh, hey, this might be the best chance to try to look for him because we'll be able to see his footprints clear as day. And then coincidentally, the farmer comes up and says like, the Invisible Man, he's in the barn. And holy cow, they have a whole army and a half surrounding this barn. And then they set it on fire, and whenever they're trying to smoke them out, which, I mean, makes sense and everything, but they are doing the arm linking thing again. And I guess it was just fortunate that the way he walked out, he just walked in a straight line, even though the guy was holding a gun at him.
Right.
So that part was definitely like yeah, I guess this was a moment of like, well, we got to wrap up shooting soon.
Right.
So, because it was pretty definitive, like pretty much like,
yeah, and then he falls over. Yeah, it would have made more sense, but maybe not been as cinematic or whatever if like they just had guns trained, because they said it was the only one exit was the door.
Yes,
they just had guns trained on the door, and as soon as it blew open, they were just like, and then you see like a couple staggering footsteps and then him fall or something would be.
I think that would have been better. Yeah. I definitely would have agreed with that, but I guess
because they set it up like he's so slippery and so hard to catch, and yet just one guy with a gun got him. Like
yeah, one guy aiming in a straight line as he walked in a straight line.
Right.
But that being said, still cool to see like the footprints appear in the snow and everything, how well it was done, and then the body falling over. Seeing that, it was cool, but it was definitely like plot wise, like it's pretty silly.
I think there's a lot you could do with the plot that would maybe oomph up the storytelling aspect a little bit. Like, what if he does manage to escape that and he runs back to his lover, and his lover is the one that kills him or whatever? Like, because he finds out how crazy he is, or what if Kemp was actually the bait the whole time, and because he knew that they'd follow him into the mountains, and then Kemp kills him, or whatever. Like, just anything, man. But no, he was in a barn, and then they shot him with a gun. But
yeah, you do at least get the final scene whenever he's on his deathbed, and I do like whenever Dr. Cranley asks the doctor, it's like, well, can't you help him? He's like, I can't see what I'm looking at. Just straight up, like, I can't see anything.
But I do love how the doctor just somehow knows, even though this is like experimental technology. He's like, oh yeah, when he dies, he'll slowly fade back into normal as the drug wears off.
I guess he read that German journal too.
Right.
I guess. But I do like, again, it's like the last bit of like sanity, I guess, of Dr. Griffin calling out for Flora as she appears. I don't, although I do love that the doctor already knows it's going to be gruesome apparently whenever he turns visible and everything. So I'm curious on how shocking it was to see him turn visible, because like whenever he dies, you see the skeleton appear, then like muscle tones and everything, and then inevitably his face, which, I do think is a good ending, like seeing the Invisible Man turn visible. It's just the steps that took there, like from the point like after he kills Kemp to turning visible. I think it was just one of those things of, we don't have time for this, we gotta speed up.
Right, yeah, let's get it going. And they kind of give him a line too that like cements what's supposedly the message of the movie, but like it wasn't really a great through line throughout the rest of the movie, so it didn't have that much oomph to me. But he's like, I meddled in things man shouldn't, or whatever.
Yeah.
And then dies, which is a throwback to like whenever Kemp in the beginning is like, he's meddling with things that man shouldn't, or whatever.
Yeah, Frankenstein definitely did it better.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, which is, it's definitely like, I try not to compare films to other films, but whenever it has similar themes and everything, it's kind of hard to not compare and everything. Right. But again, I feel like ultimately this film was about more goofy, fun, dark stuff than it was actually something very grounded and very impactful emotionally and everything. But yeah, it was still a fun romp. It's definitely one, like I said, definitely got a good laughs out of and just enjoyed watching. Like, if you want a film that has early use of special effects, this is probably one of the prime candidates to study.
Yeah, true.
This is like a staple for special effects lovers, like people that are interested in it, especially in a time era like before CGI took over and everything.
Right, before any sort of digital involvement,
Yeah, which again, like I know I like boast practical effects to the nth degree there. But seriously, this is like some of the best effects I've seen in a film this early on.
Right.
So
Which I feel like anybody with After Effects and a little bit of knowledge in 2023 can make the effects that they were making as far as the
for
sure goes. I mean, it's like we're not saying it's impressive by today's standards, but it's impressive by like if you tried to replicate it the way they did it, that's got to be extremely difficult.
Yes, and so I think that's one of the biggest reasons people should respect this film.
Yeah.
Again, mostly for technical merits than actual written merits and everything else.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty much the most of it there is pretty, like, short, sweet, to the point there.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts, tidbits, critiques, praises, anything like that?
I don't think so, man. I really wish that while he was doing all that mischief, man, he did a couple more just funny things. I want to see him just like spank somebody in the middle of sex. I don't know.
I think he did spank one of the police officers.
He definitely slapped somebody around.
Yeah.
There's just, I want him to put on a sheet and go, "Ooh, I'm a ghost," and haunt some people. Like, if you're getting silly with it, I wish they got extra silly with it.
Yeah. Who knows? Maybe in the mini sequels they did.
True.
They did create mini sequels.
Many Invisible Mans.
Yes.
There's a lot to uncover, and I do got to give it props because, like, I think this is the only, like, invisible person intellectual property I can think of that's not superhero-y. So that's cool.
Yes, definitely cool to kind of see him more, in a horror sense as opposed to superhero sense. So, yeah, I'm definitely curious about like watching the other films and just seeing kind of how they compared to this one there, especially effects-wise and just kind of story-wise there. But that's for another time of day, I suppose. Yes. So how's about we look at the next episode we're going to be reviewing here on the podcast. This film is the first adaptation from the book, but we've reviewed the second adaptation from the book on the podcast.
Oh.
Yeah, the book was called Who Goes There?
Mm-hmm.
And then this film came out in 51. Then the other film came out in 83, I want to say, which had Kurt Russell in it.
Okay, so The Thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, and the title.
I don't know what the title of this one would be.
Well, it's all good. You could say the alien came from
Another world?
Yes.
The Thing from another planet or whatever.
Yep, you almost got it, buddy.
The Thing
Yes,
from another world.
Yes, it's the thing from the other world. I'm sorry I made that way more difficult than what I needed
No, that's okay.
So yeah, we'll be checking that one out. Figured it'd be a good one with all the snow coming in for the holidays here. Just get into the frosty mood there.
Yeah, dope.
So yeah, that'll be interesting to watch. So yeah, well, that's good. That's real good. That's real swell, bud.
Yeah, I liked the Thing. Yeah,
all right, excellent. So thank you all so much for listening to this episode. We'll see y'all again next time when we're popping the scary with The Thing from Another World. That was not rehearsed. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube, Castbox, or iTunes platforms to stay up to date when new episodes drop. To see what Aaron and I are up to, check out our respective Twitter accounts. For me, it is @CoalkirkVA, and for Aaron, it is @AnimalGameDev. Thank you all so much for listening to our podcast. We'll speak to you all again next time when we're popping the scary.